Keanu Reeves walked into the restaurant quietly, his steps soft, his clothes plain, and his head a little low. He never liked to draw attention. He never wanted people to fuss over him. All he wanted was a warm meal and a quiet place to sit. The restaurant was bright with golden lights and fancy music. Guests were laughing, clinking glasses, and dressed in expensive suits and sparkling dresses. In that setting, Keanu looked out of place, but he didn't mind. He was used to being overlooked. He paused at the entrance for a moment, giving a polite smile to the host. The host glanced at him, eyes moving up and down, and then shifted his face into a look of doubt. He didn't see a Hollywood star. He didn't see the famous man from the movies. He only saw a man with a simple jacket, hair a bit messy, and a humble look in his eyes. With a sigh, the host asked if he had a reservation. Keanu spoke softly. "Just a table for one, please." His voice carried kindness, but the host treated it like a burden. The host led him inside, but instead of placing him near the beautiful window tables or the soft candle-lit booths, he pointed to a small chair near the kitchen door. Every time the kitchen opened, hot air and noise burst out. The chair was squeezed between two tables that no one wanted. Keanu gave a small nod. He didn't complain. He didn't argue. He just sat down calmly, his hands folded, his eyes soft, as if this was perfectly fine for him. Around him, the air changed. Some guests glanced his way and whispered. They looked at him the way people look at someone who doesn't belong. Some tilted their heads and giggled quietly as if his presence was funny. A woman with shining jewelry whispered to her partner, "He looks homeless. Why would they let someone like him in here?" Her partner smirked but said nothing. Keanu heard them, but he didn't react. He simply lowered his eyes to the tablecloth and waited. A waiter approached slowly, his shoulders stiff, his eyes rolling as if this job was beneath him. He placed the menu on the table with a thud, not gently like he did for other customers. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat and cold. Keanu opened the menu politely and studied it. He didn't ask for anything special. He just ordered something simple, pasta with a drink. The waiter nodded with irritation, like even taking this order was a waste of time. He left without a smile, without respect. As Keanu sat alone, time seemed heavy. Other waiters passed by, serving wine to wealthy customers, laughing with them, making them feel special. But for Keanu, they didn't even glance his way. He was invisible. Yet Keanu's face showed no anger. He wasn't bothered on the surface. His heart stayed calm. He had lived enough to know that kindness means not fighting fire with fire. Minutes passed, and his drink never came. People around him were already enjoying food and dessert. While his table was empty, he sat patiently, folding and unfolding the napkin. His eyes sometimes lifted to see the laughter of others, but then returned to the quiet corner he was given. The sound of the kitchen door banging open and closed behind him echoed again and again, but still he didn't move. He didn't demand better treatment. The whispers grew louder. Some guests now openly looked at him with judgment. One man chuckled. "What's he doing here? He can't even afford this place." Another leaned closer to his wife. "He should have gone to a cheap diner, not here." The words floated in the air like poison, but Keanu kept his peace. He didn't defend himself. He didn't reveal his name. He let them think what they wanted, because his pride wasn't built on being recognized. As the minutes turned to nearly half an hour, the injustice grew clearer. Every table around him had drinks, food, and friendly service. But his table stayed empty. The waiter who took his order walked past him again and again, pretending not to see him. He laughed with other guests, polished wine glasses, and acted as if Keanu's order didn't exist. The message was clear. They didn't want him there, but Keanu didn't rise, didn't walk out in anger. He sat. With calm patience, his eyes looked gentle, and there was even a small, almost hidden smile on his lips, as if he understood something no one else did. He didn't need to fight for respect. He didn't need to shout for service. His silence spoke louder than any words. His quiet presence made the cruelty of the staff shine brighter. In that moment, the restaurant thought it was humiliating him. They thought they were making him feel small. But in truth, they were exposing their own arrogance, their own blindness. They couldn't see the human sitting before them. They couldn't see the soul of a man who carried kindness like armor. The restaurant encounter had only begun, but already the stage was set for something unforgettable. The audience could feel it. This wasn't the end. It was the start of a lesson they would never forget. The waiter came back after a long time, his steps slow, his face showing no respect. He placed a glass of water on the table, but even that was done carelessly. Some of the water spilled on the side of the glass. Keanu gave him a polite thank you. But the waiter only nodded and walked away without a smile. The contrast was clear. At other tables, the waiters were charming, their voices sweet, their movements filled with care. But for Keanu, it was as if every gesture was heavy. Minutes later, the waiter returned. He dropped a basket of bread on the table, not placing it gently, but as though he wanted to be finished quickly. Then he looked at Keanu and smirked. Anything else? The tone wasn't polite. It wasn't kind. It was sharp. Keanu simply said, "No, this is fine, thank you." His voice was soft, his kindness steady, even though the treatment was unfair. Other guests noticed this too. A man in a suit whispered to his wife, "Look at him. He doesn't even belong here." The woman giggled. "Maybe he sneaked in. He looks like he has no money." Their words weren't quiet. They wanted him to hear. And he did hear. His eyes dropped to the bread basket, his hand resting on the napkin, but his lips never spoke a word in anger. The waiter delayed his order. Keanu's simple pasta request was forgotten while other tables were served with rich meals. The smell of roasted meat, fresh fish, and creamy sauces filled the room, but his table stayed empty. He didn't complain. Not once. He sat still, folding the napkin neatly, placing it on his lap, trying to make himself small in the noisy place. Every few minutes the waiter passed by, and every time his eyes met Keanu's, they held a trace of mockery as if to say, "You are nothing here." And still Keanu remained calm. He didn't show the irritation others might have shown. His patience was like a wall, but to the people around him, that patience looked like weakness. One young couple at a nearby table leaned closer and laughed quietly. "He must be poor," the man whispered. "That's why they put him by the kitchen. He doesn't deserve the main hall." The woman covered her mouth as she giggled. Their words stung, but Keanu's shoulders stayed relaxed. His heart didn't allow anger to take over. He had been through too much in life to fight over pride. When the waiter finally returned, he didn't bring food. He only brought the wine list and tossed it on the table. "Do you want wine?" he asked in a tone that suggested Keanu couldn't afford even a glass. Keanu looked at the list, smiled faintly, and said, "No, thank you. Water is enough." His words were honest, his smile kind. The waiter rolled his eyes and left again. Now the other guests were openly watching. Some shook their heads, some whispered and pointed. A man near the corner sneered, "If he can't order wine, why is he here? This place is not for beggars." The cruelty grew thicker, but Keanu sat silently. His fingers tapped the table softly as he waited. His silence was stronger than any reply. The manager of the restaurant passed by and noticed him sitting quietly in the corner. Instead of checking if everything was fine, the manager frowned and whispered something to the waiter. The waiter chuckled and nodded. It was clear they were mocking him together. The unfairness burned in the air. But Keanu did not move. His stillness was like a quiet protest. The insults were not just from the staff, but also from the way he was treated as invisible. Every smile, every laugh, every kind gesture was given to other customers, but never to him. The staff served, others with shining plates and flowing wine, but his table remained plain and forgotten. The bread was getting dry, the water was warm, and the food he ordered never came. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his face calm, his eyes thoughtful. To anyone watching closely, it was almost as if he had seen this before, as if he knew this was not new to him. He had lived a life where people judged him by how he looked, not who he was. He had been treated unfairly many times, and yet every time he chose kindness over anger. The whispers continued and the air grew thick with quiet laughter at his expense. But he refused to let it touch his heart. He stayed gentle, his voice never sharp, his presence never loud. It was this patience that made the insults louder in the eyes of anyone with a conscience? The cruelty of the staff, the mocking of the guests, it all reflected more on them than on him. And yet behind that patience there was a sadness that kindness was so often mistaken for weakness, a sadness that the world still judged by clothes and appearances, a sadness that people failed to see the dignity in simple silence. But Keanu stayed still. His calmness carried weight. His silence carried meaning. Even though the waiter treated him poorly, even though the guests mocked him, he carried himself with quiet grace. The insults only revealed the truth, that those who thought they were superior were the ones who lacked true class. The subtle insults had grown louder. The staff thought they were humiliating a nobody. The guests thought they were laughing at a stranger, but they were all blind to the reality. They didn't know the man they mocked was someone the whole world respected, someone who had lived through pain, loss, and hardship and yet chose kindness every time. The insults were seeds, cruel and small, but they were also setting the stage, because it would not be long before the truth came crashing down on everyone, and when it did, the laughter would stop, and silence would take its place. The tension in the restaurant grew heavier with each passing minute. The waiters moved quickly around the tables, their attention sharp and polite for the wealthy guests. But for Keanu, every movement was slow and deliberate, almost as if they were punishing him for being there. He watched quietly, his hands folded on the table, his eyes calm, but inside a storm of thoughts was forming. He could feel the judgmental stares, the whispered words, the way people laughed at his presence. And yet he did not rise to anger. He did not shout or demand respect. He simply waited, knowing that sometimes patience speaks louder than any words. The couple nearby had now begun to point and laugh more openly, their whispers growing bolder. "Look at him," the man said. "He thinks he belongs here. But he doesn't even know. The first thing about fine dining?" The woman smirked. "I wonder how he even got in. Maybe he snuck past the door." They giggled, their laughter cutting across the room, aiming to humiliate. Their voices were loud enough for him to hear, but he did not respond. He only kept his calm, sipping the water slowly, as if nothing mattered. But inside, he felt the weight of their cruelty. The waiter returned once again, this time with a menu in hand, his expression flat, his eyes cold. "Do you know what you want yet?" he asked, his tone heavy with sarcasm. Keanu looked up and smiled faintly. "Yes, I would like the pasta, please," he said politely, not a hint of irritation in his voice. The waiter snorted, clearly unimpressed, and walked away without saying another word. The movement of the other staff was smooth and polite, their smiles bright, their attention to detail perfect. But for Keanu, every gesture seemed calculated to make him feel small, to remind him that he did not belong. The air around him was thick with tension. He could feel eyes on him from every corner, some curious, some judgmental, some cruel. A few children stared openly, pointing at him and whispering to their parents, "Who is that man? Why is he sitting all alone?" The parents laughed softly, patting the children on the head, but their smiles did not reach their eyes. It was clear that everyone in the room was aware of him, and yet no one offered kindness. No one offered even a polite nod. The silence of neglect was deafening. Meanwhile, the other tables were filled with laughter. The clinking of glasses and the rustle of elegant clothing. Plates were served with care. Wine poured with skill. Conversation flowed easily, and the air was warm with camaraderie. But Keanu's table remained empty of such attention. The bread in the basket had grown stale, the water was now lukewarm, and the pasta he had ordered had not arrived. His patience was being tested, but he did not allow frustration to take over. He understood that this was not just about food. It was about how people treated those they assumed to be inferior. Then came a moment that made the tension almost unbearable. The waiter, noticing that Keanu had not yet eaten, leaned slightly and said in a low voice meant only for him, "Maybe you should leave. This place is not for people like you." The words hit like a sudden cold wind, sharp and unkind. Keanu looked up at him calmly, his eyes steady, and said, "I am here to enjoy a meal just like everyone else. His voice was soft, but firm, carrying a quiet strength. The waiter stared for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the lack of anger or submission, but quickly regained his composure and walked away, muttering under his breath. Around the room, a few guests noticed the exchange. Some raised their eyebrows, others whispered to their neighbors, but most simply turned their attention back to their own meals. They did not understand the quiet defiance in Keanu's demeanor. They thought silence was weakness. They thought patience was fear. But in reality, it was courage, a courage that did not need to shout to be felt. As the minutes passed, the tension shifted slightly. The other guests began to sense that something was different about him, something in the way he sat, something in the calmness of his face, something that made their laughter fade into uncertain whispers. It was not long before a few people began to look closer, noticing the kindness in his eyes, the dignity in his posture. He was not just a man sitting quietly. He was someone who carried himself with honor even when treated poorly. The staff, unaware of the change in perception, continued their routine, but the room was now charged with a strange energy, a tension that was no longer one-sided, a tension that spoke of hidden strength, of patience, of quiet power. Keanu sipped his water again, folded the napkin neatly, and let the moment pass. He knew that this silence, this calm presence, was already making an impact, that people were noticing, and that the humiliation they had intended was slowly turning into curiosity. And just as the tension reached its peak, something unexpected happened. The manager appeared from the corner of the restaurant, his face suddenly serious. He had been watching the scene unfold, noticing how the waiter had treated Keanu, noticing the stares, the whispers, the laughter. He approached the table quietly, his steps deliberate, and looked down at Keanu, who met his gaze with the same calm, patient eyes. The manager's expression shifted from sternness to a mix of realization and concern. It was in that moment that the first crack appeared in the facade of cruelty. The tension in the room had built like a storm, and now, as the manager stood there, everyone sensed that the story was about to change, that the treatment Keanu had endured for the past hour would no longer be ignored, that the quiet strength he had shown, the patience and dignity, was more powerful than any insult or mockery, and so the tension rose, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with anticipation, as everyone in the restaurant waited to see what would happen next, who would finally step forward, and how the world would respond to someone treated unfairly. Just as the tension in the restaurant reached its peak, the heavy silence was broken by the sudden sound of the front door opening. The chime rang sharply, and a tall figure stepped in, carrying himself with confidence, energy, and a presence that could not be ignored. It was Gordon Ramsay, the world-famous chef, his sharp eyes scanning the room as he walked past the host, past the tables and straight toward the kitchen area. Yet something in his gaze drew him to one particular table, the one where Keanu Reeves sat quietly, patient and dignified. Despite the laughter, the whispers, and the thinly veiled judgment, all around Keanu remained calm, and Ramsay seemed to notice that immediately, his attention sharp and focused. The restaurant staff froze for a moment, recognizing the presence of Ramsay, a man whose reputation for excellence and honesty was unmatched. They straightened their backs, unsure whether to be nervous or grateful. But the moment he approached, all attention turned toward him. Guests stopped talking, forks paused mid-air, and the atmosphere shifted in an instant. A kind of electric tension filled the air, not because of anger, but because everyone knew something important was about to happen. Ramsay's eyes fell on Keanu, and he smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed almost impossible to miss. There was a spark of recognition, not just because Keanu was famous, but because he could sense the unfair treatment that had been happening. Ramsay did not speak immediately. He did not announce himself loudly. He simply stood near the table, letting his presence speak for him. The staff could feel it, the same way a calm storm carries the power before the thunder, and they knew that the moment of reckoning had arrived. Then Ramsay leaned slightly toward the nearest waiter, his voice low but sharp. "What is going on here?" he asked, the words carrying authority, demanding honesty. The waiter hesitated, clearly Just eating, sir, he stammered, trying to sound calm. But Ramsay's gaze did not waver, piercing, clear, and unforgiving. He continued, "You've been rude, disrespectful, and unprofessional, and I've been watching. I don't tolerate this kind of behavior in any kitchen I manage." His tone was steady but strong, every word landing like a weight on the room. The staff looked at each other nervously, whispering, trying to explain themselves. But Ramsay was not giving them the chance. "Stop making excuses," he said, his eyes locking onto the waiter. "This is not about popularity, not about who you think deserves to be here. This is about respect. Everyone in my kitchen and my restaurant deserves it, and if you can't give it, then you need to leave." The words echoed through the dining area, and guests turned to watch, realizing that the story of cruelty and humiliation was coming to an end. The air felt lighter already, as if Ramsay's presence alone had begun to shift the energy. Keanu, still calm, watched the exchange quietly, his hands folded, sipping his water slowly. He did not speak. He did not need to. His patience and dignity had been enough to bring Ramsay's attention. His quiet strength had called someone powerful to action, someone who could make the injustice stop, and now, as Ramsay stood there, the moment was changing. The couple who had been whispering and laughing looked uneasy, their smug expressions fading, replaced by uncertainty as they realized their cruelty had been seen, noticed, and would not be ignored. Ramsay then turned his attention fully to Keanu, stepping closer to the table, leaning down slightly with a kind but firm expression. "I apologize for what you've endured here," he said, his voice carrying across the table, yet soft enough for only Keanu to hear clearly. "No one should ever be treated like that. You have been patient, polite, and dignified, and that deserves respect, not ridicule." Keanu nodded politely, smiling faintly, his gratitude subtle but sincere. "Thank you," he replied simply, his voice calm and steady. The effect on the restaurant was immediate. Guests whispered to each other, glancing nervously at the staff. The waiters who had been rude suddenly realized they had been wrong, and the kitchen felt the weight of Ramsay's authority settle over them. It was clear that he would not tolerate anyone treating another human being badly, not in his sight, not under his roof. The tension that had filled the room for so long began to dissolve, replaced by respect, curiosity, and a newfound sense of order. Ramsay called the manager over, speaking quietly but firmly. "You need to ensure this never happens again. Your staff must understand respect is not optional, and make sure this gentleman's meal is perfect on the house with every courtesy he deserves." The manager nodded quickly, his face red with embarrassment and relief, rushing to make things right. As the staff scurried to comply, Ramsay gave a reassuring glance to Keanu, acknowledging the unfair treatment that had occurred, but also recognizing the dignity with which he had handled it. Then, Ramsay addressed the room, his voice carrying authority, kindness, and an edge of humor. "Let this be a lesson for everyone here. Treat each other with respect. No one is too big or too small, too famous or unknown to deserve kindness. And if you forget, I'll be back." His words made the room pause, nod, and even some of the rude guests looked down, humbled, as the energy shifted completely. The room was no longer tense. The whispers of ridicule replaced by murmurs of approval, admiration, and gratitude. Keanu smiled faintly, not from arrogance but from relief. He could finally enjoy his meal without judgment, without the heavy cloud of unfair treatment looming over him. The presence of Ramsay had turned the tide, had restored respect and decency, and had reminded everyone that true kindness and authority could make a difference in even the most difficult situations. As Ramsay moved back toward the kitchen, the staff straightened, the guests whispered in excitement, and the restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But the story of injustice and intervention had been etched into every person's mind. The memory of patience, dignity, and timely kindness had transformed a moment of cruelty into one of respect, awareness, and hope. The tension in the restaurant had not completely faded, and even though Ramsay had intervened, the rude couple who had laughed at Keanu Reeves still sat at their table, fidgeting nervously, glancing at the actor with unease. They had not expected someone to step in on his behalf, especially someone as commanding as Gordon Ramsay, and now the weight of embarrassment and guilt pressed down on them. They could feel the stares of other diners, the whispers of disapproval, and the sharp awareness that their behavior had been seen and judged. Their laughter and smugness had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty and fear of confrontation. Ramsay returned briefly to the dining area, his eyes scanning the restaurant, and then fixed his gaze on the couple, who shrank under the intensity of his stare. "You," he said, pointing at them with a finger that seemed to carry authority from miles away. "You need to understand something very clearly. Treating someone poorly because of who they are or how they look is unacceptable. Do you understand?" His voice was firm, precise, and uncompromising, yet it held a calm power that silenced the room. Even the other guests leaned slightly forward, curious to see what would happen next. The man shifted in his seat, stammering, We didn't mean..." But Ramsay cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. "You didn't mean? Intentions don't erase actions. You laughed, you whispered, you made someone feel small and unwelcome. That is not acceptable behavior, and it must be addressed immediately." His words were like a hammer striking a bell, each one resonating with truth and authority. The woman next to him tried to apologize, her voice shaking. We're sorry," but Ramsay's gaze did not soften. He wanted them to understand that apologies needed to be real, sincere, and backed by action, not just words. Then Ramsay gestured toward Keanu, who remained calm, watching quietly, his demeanor polite yet firm. The couple glanced at him, realizing for the first time that he had endured their ridicule silently, with patience and dignity. Something about his quiet strength made the couple feel smaller, not because he had said anything, but because he had remained human, kind, and patient in the face of their cruelty. Ramsay spoke again. "Look at him. Watch how he handled this, and learn from it. This is how a person deserves to be treated. Like a human being with respect no matter who they are." The couple's faces turned red, and they looked down at their table ashamed. The energy in the room shifted further, the other guests whispering to each other, nodding in agreement, and some even smiling at the way justice was quietly unfolding. The rude pair had been confronted not with anger or shouting, but with calm authority, clear words, and a demonstration of respect for the one they had wronged. It was a lesson they could not ignore, one that would stay with them far longer than any argument or insult. Ramsay then asked the manager to step in, speaking quietly to him. "Make sure they understand the consequences of their actions, and ensure that they apologize properly, not just with words, but with acknowledgement of the harm they caused." The manager nodded, rushing over to address the couple, his voice polite but firm, guiding them to the moment of real confrontation. The couple fumbled with their words, trying to express their regret, but the act of facing Keanu directly, under Ramsay's watchful eye, made their apologies genuine. They had no choice but to realize that their behavior had been wrong, and they needed to correct it sincerely. Keanu remained calm throughout, nodding politely at their apology, his eyes reflecting understanding and forgiveness, but also a quiet strength that reminded the couple that patience and dignity often speak louder than anger. Ramsay watched closely, satisfied that the lesson was being absorbed, and that the balance of respect was being restored in the room. He knew that sometimes people needed to see the impact of their actions in real time, and this was exactly that moment. The other diners felt the change too. Some quietly clapped their hands, not to embarrass the couple further, but to show support for justice and decency. The staff who had previously been nervous now stood straighter, watching how a moment of cruelty had been transformed into a lesson in kindness and respect. Even the air in the restaurant seemed lighter, filled with awareness, humility, and a sense of shared humanity. It was a small yet powerful reminder that respect must be given, and injustice must be noticed and corrected. After the apologies were accepted, Ramsay gave one final glance around the dining area, his expression both kind and firm. "Remember this," he said, addressing everyone, not just the couple. "Life is too short to treat people poorly. Respect is everything, and if you forget that, you will regret it." His voice carried authority, but also warmth. leaving an impression that would stay with the staff, the guests, and the rude couple. Themselves, the lesson was clear. Kindness and respect are not optional, and those who fail to see that will be reminded. Keanu finally relaxed, the last tension easing from his shoulders. He could now enjoy his meal without fear or judgment. The rude couple sat quietly reflecting on their behavior, their faces marked by humility and understanding, and the staff felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that fairness and decency could still be upheld even in challenging situations. Ramsay's intervention had not only protected Keanu, but had also created a powerful example for everyone present, showing that courage, patience, and respect can overcome cruelty. By the time Ramsay returned to the kitchen, the restaurant had shifted completely, from a place of tension and judgment to one of understanding and respect. Guests whispered to each other about the incident, sharing the story of how someone famous had been treated unfairly, yet handled it with dignity. The rude couple remained silent, contemplating the lesson they had learned, and the staff moved with renewed focus, aware that their behavior mattered and that respect must always come first. The power of the moment lingered long after Ramsay had left the dining area, reminding everyone present that patience, dignity, and timely action can turn even the most uncomfortable situations into moments of learning, awareness, and positive change. The story of injustice, confrontation, and respect would be remembered, retold, and appreciated, showing that real acts of kindness and courage can make a lasting impact. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted completely after the confrontation with the rude couple, and the staff felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. They had all been tense when Keanu Reeves walked in, worried that a celebrity might complicate their night, but now they realized that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Gordon Ramsay's presence had not only defended Keanu but also reminded everyone in the restaurant about the importance of respect, and the staff started to see the evening in a new light. It was no longer just about serving meals. It was about creating an environment where everyone could feel safe and valued. The young hostess, who had been unsure how to manage the situation earlier, now moved with renewed confidence, greeting customers with warmth and politeness. Her previous hesitations were replaced by a calm understanding that good behavior and patience could change the mood of an entire room. Even the servers, who had been nervous about mistakes or complaints, began to interact with guests with more attention and care. Every gesture they made now carried more meaning, inspired by the example of dignity and kindness they had seen from both Keanu and Ramsay. Keanu himself remained calm and composed, observing the staff quietly as they worked. He did not demand special treatment or attention, yet his presence alone brought a sense of pride and responsibility to the employees. They realized that he could have reacted with anger or frustration at the earlier incident, but instead, he had remained patient, dignified, and polite. His behavior silently taught them the value of composure under pressure, and they wanted to rise to meet that standard. The chefs in the kitchen, who had previously been focused solely on the food, now felt a deeper sense of purpose. Ramsay's words and actions had reminded them that what they did was more than cooking meals. It was also about creating experiences and treating everyone involved, customers and co-workers, with respect. They worked with renewed energy, chopping, stirring, and plating each dish with care, aware that their efforts contributed to the overall environment of fairness and courtesy in the restaurant. The kitchen buzzed with efficiency, but now there was a sense of pride and teamwork that had not been there before. Meanwhile, the rude couple, who had been humbled by Ramsay's firm but fair confrontation, sat quietly, their earlier arrogance replaced by reflection. They watched the staff move with confidence, professionalism, and kindness, and it struck them how much their behavior had disrupted not only the peace of the restaurant but also the flow of energy among the employees. The couple's whispers of regret reminded everyone that actions have consequences, and witnessing genuine professionalism and dignity could be a lesson for even the most disrespectful patrons. As the evening progressed, Keanu's appreciation for the staff became more visible. He offered small gestures, a polite smile, a nod of acknowledgement, and even a quiet word of thanks whenever someone assisted him. Each staff member felt a surge of motivation when he looked their way, realizing that their effort, care, and patience were recognized. It was more than just a celebrity acknowledging them. It was validation of their humanity and the respect they showed. This small but meaningful feedback inspired the staff to continue being thoughtful, attentive, and courteous for the rest of the night. The atmosphere in the restaurant became lighter, almost celebratory in a quiet way. Guests noticed the difference too. Many whispered about how unusual it was to see a famous actor treated with such patience and humility, and how the staff had handled a potentially tense situation with grace. The energy of the room shifted, and laughter, polite conversation, and appreciative murmurs replaced the earlier tension. It was a reminder to everyone present that small actions of kindness and professionalism can ripple outward, affecting everyone in the space. One of the younger servers, who had been nervous and uncertain, took inspiration from Keanu's patience and Ramsay's firm guidance. He started to anticipate the needs of guests more proactively, offering refills and checking in more attentively. Each interaction became smoother and more confident, and he realized that standing up for decency, even indirectly, could create a better experience for everyone. The older staff members noticed his change, nodding in approval, and it became clear that the evening was teaching lessons not just to the rude couple, but to everyone. Ramsay occasionally checked on the staff, offering encouragement, brief instructions, and reminders about the importance of respect and kindness. His presence was calming yet inspiring, and his ability to combine authority with support motivated the team to rise above their usual routines. They worked harder, smiled more genuinely, and moved with the confidence of people who understood the value of dignity in action. It was as if a quiet transformation had occurred in the restaurant, turning it into a place where fairness, kindness, and human decency were celebrated in every gesture. Keanu, observing everything, continued to model the behavior that had inspired. The staff remaining polite, calm, and appreciative. His simple acts, a smile, a thank you, a patient response, reinforced the lesson that respect and kindness could influence everyone around him. Guests who had initially watched from afar now joined in the positive energy, offering polite words to staff and enjoying their meals with renewed attention and gratitude. The atmosphere became one of mutual respect, a small but powerful ecosystem of kindness and awareness. By the end of the evening, the staff had transformed, the rude couple had learned a humbling lesson, and Keanu's appreciation had left a lasting impression on everyone. Ramsay's intervention had sparked a ripple effect of decency and professionalism, turning a tense situation into a moment of learning and growth. The staff realized that their actions mattered, that kindness and patience could change the room, and that moments of challenge could become opportunities to show humanity at its best. The evening ended with smiles, nods, and a quiet sense of accomplishment. The staff felt proud, not only for serving well but for creating a respectful and welcoming environment. Keanu left the restaurant with gratitude in his heart. The rude couple departed with reflection and humility, and the story of the night would be remembered as a lesson in respect, dignity, and the power of kindness. The experience left an indelible mark on everyone present, showing that even small gestures of appreciation and patience can transform a tense moment into something extraordinary. The night at the restaurant could have ended quietly, with only those inside remembering what happened. But fate decided otherwise. Several guests had been recording small clips on their phones during the incident, at first to capture Gordon Ramsay's fiery entrance, but later because they realized they were witnessing something powerful. By the next morning, those clips began spreading online, shared on social media platforms with captions like, "Keanu Reeves treated badly in restaurant," "Gordon Ramsay steps in." Within hours, the videos had millions of views. The media picked it up almost instantly. Headlines flooded the internet. Keanu Reeves humiliated at restaurant, saved by Gordon Ramsay. A lesson in kindness and respect. And when two legends showed the world what dignity looks like, the story was everywhere. People couldn't stop talking about the contrast between Keanu's quiet patience and Ramsay's fiery defense. It was as if the world had been waiting for a reminder that kindness and courage still mattered. Reporters camped outside the restaurant, asking staff and guests what had happened. The hostess described Keanu's calm demeanor, saying he never once raised his voice even when treated poorly. A young waiter admitted he felt ashamed after realizing how wrong the staff had been. Their words reached millions, painting a picture of humility, patience, and respect. For once, the story of the day wasn't about scandal or negativity. It was about humanity. People online flooded Keanu with praise. Fans shared countless stories of their own encounters with him. Tales of his kindness on movie sets, his generosity to strangers, his habit of giving up his seat on the subway. This new incident fit perfectly into the image the world already cherished. The internet was united in admiration, memes, artwork, and heartfelt posts filled timelines, celebrating Keanu as a man of quiet dignity. The hashtag #TigerRespect, like Keanu, trended worldwide. At the same time, Gordon Ramsay was applauded for stepping in when it mattered most. People who only knew him as the fiery chef on television now saw another side of him, a man who could use his sharp voice and authority to protect others. Comments poured in. This is the Ramsay the world needs. He doesn't just shout in kitchens, he shouts for justice. His reputation grew even stronger, no longer just a symbol of perfection in food, but also a defender of respect. The hashtag #StandWithRamsay climbed the charts. News channels replayed the video again and again, showing Keanu sitting quietly, showing the rude couple shrinking under Ramsay's words, showing the moment when Keanu simply smiled and said, "Thank you," instead of demanding revenge. Talk shows discussed it endlessly. Experts called it a lesson in humility. Some said Keanu's silence was more powerful than 1,000 speeches. Others said Ramsay's defense proved that kindness sometimes needs a loud voice. Together they created a moment that people around the world felt inspired by. Meanwhile, the restaurant itself faced a storm. The manager issued a public apology, admitting that the staff had behaved wrongly and promising that training would be given to ensure respect for all customers. Some people boycotted the restaurant, angry that Keanu had been treated so poorly, but many praised the apology, saying the true lesson was in acknowledging mistakes and growing from them. The restaurant learned that reputation was not built only on food but also on fairness and respect. The rude couple became infamous overnight, though their names were not revealed. People online referred to them simply as the laughing pair. They faced harsh judgment, but Keanu himself surprised everyone again. When asked by reporters what he thought of them, he said gently, "Everyone makes mistakes. Sometimes people act without thinking. I don't hold anger toward them. I hope they learned something valuable." His forgiveness stunned the world, making the story even more powerful. In the days that followed, charities spoke up, connecting Keanu's humility to his history of generosity. Articles reminded readers of how he donated large portions of his movie earnings, how he quietly supported hospitals and children's causes. This single restaurant story became a symbol of his lifelong kindness, reminding the world why he was loved far beyond his films. Fans began writing letters and posting videos thanking both Keanu and Ramsay. Some said the story helped them teach their children about respect. Others said it gave them courage to stand up against unfair treatment in their own lives. It wasn't just entertainment news anymore. It was a lesson spreading through schools, families, and workplaces. People were inspired to act kinder, to respect strangers, to defend those treated unfairly. Keanu, staying true to his nature, didn't make a big deal about it. He continued his life quietly, avoiding the spotlight. But when asked about Ramsay, he smiled and said, "He did what was right, I'm grateful." Ramsay, on the other hand, joked in interviews saying, "If I see anyone disrespecting Keanu again, I'll serve them raw chicken as punishment." His humor made people laugh, but his sincerity was clear. He had meant every word in the restaurant, and he would stand by it again. The story traveled beyond borders. Newspapers in Asia, Europe, Africa, and South America covered it. People from all cultures connected to the lesson. It didn't matter if they were fans of Keanu's movies or Ramsay's cooking. The message was universal. Respect and kindness are human values that everyone should uphold. In the end, part 7 of this story was not just about media attention. It was about how quickly the world united behind an act of kindness. It showed that people were hungry for stories of dignity, forgiveness, and courage. It proved that even in a world filled with negativity, moments like these could shine brighter, reminding everyone that humanity still had heroes, not in capes, but in simple actions of patience and in loud voices that spoke up for what was right. The story did not end when Keanu Reeves left the restaurant that night. In truth, it was only the beginning. The videos kept spreading, the headlines kept rolling, and the conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces all returned to the same point. What had happened was not just about a famous actor and a celebrity chef. It was about humanity, respect, and how we choose to treat one another. The moral lesson echoed far beyond that dining room, leaving ripples that touched the world. People began sharing their own stories online. Some admitted that they had judged strangers too quickly, simply by clothes, accents, or appearances. They confessed that they had acted rudely or dismissed others without knowing their true worth. The incident with Keanu became a mirror, showing people their own flaws and urging them to do better. One woman wrote, "I realized I've ignored quiet people at work just like those waiters ignored him. I promised to never do it again." Another man shared, "I used to laugh at people who looked different, but now I see how cruel that is." The story was transforming lives quietly, gently, one lesson at a time. Teachers even began using the event as an example in classrooms. They showed their students the videos and asked, "What do you see here?" The children noticed Keanu's patience, his calm, his refusal to fight back with anger. They also noticed Gordon Ramsay's courage, the way he stepped in loudly when silence was not enough. Students learned that sometimes the strongest power is quiet dignity, and other times it is speaking up for someone who cannot. Together, the two men had shown that kindness can wear many faces. The restaurant staff never forgot that night either. They continued their training, practicing how to welcome every guest equally. They spoke about the incident among themselves, admitting their mistakes. Some even wrote letters to Keanu, apologizing sincerely and thanking him for teaching them, not with words but with his example. The lesson became part of the restaurant's culture, a constant reminder that respect is the foundation of service. For the rude couple, the humiliation stayed with them, but so did the lesson. They had seen how the world judged them, how millions pointed at their arrogance, but more importantly, they had seen Keanu forgive them. He didn't shout at them, he didn't insult them back, he simply accepted their apology with kindness. That quiet forgiveness haunted them in the best way, forcing them to reflect and change. They learned that arrogance only isolates while humility builds bridges. Keanu himself continued to live as he always had, quietly, humbly. He didn't bask in the praise or try to use the attention for his benefit. When reporters asked him what message he wanted the world to take, he only smiled and said, "Treat everyone kindly. You never know the story they carry." His words were simple, but they resonated more than long speeches ever could. His actions, his patience, and his humility became a living sermon on kindness. Gordon Ramsay also gained new respect, not just as a chef, but as a man willing to stand up for others. In interviews, he said, "Sometimes I shout in the kitchen to push people to do better, but that night I shouted because people forgot basics. Humanity, and I won't ever stand by and watch that happen." His directness inspired many, proving that using your voice for good can create real change. He showed that courage is not always about fighting enemies. Sometimes it's about protecting strangers. As days turned to weeks, the story remained alive because it was not just about celebrities. It was about every person. People realized that they too faced daily chances to be like Keanu, calm, patient, and forgiving, or like Ramsay, strong, loud, and protective. It was a reminder that both roles are important in life. Sometimes we must endure quietly. Other times we must speak up. The world needs both kinds of kindness. The moral lesson became clear. True respect is not measured by wealth, fame, or appearance. It is measured by how we treat the ones who seem to have nothing. It is measured by whether we choose to laugh at someone's pain or help them stand tall. It is measured by whether we stay silent when someone is mistreated or whether we step forward to defend them. That night showed the balance of humility and courage, patience and justice, forgiveness and accountability. The lasting impact was undeniable. Restaurants across the world used the incident as a case study in training. Families told their children about it during dinner conversations. Friends debated what they would have done in Ramsay's place, and strangers began small acts of kindness inspired by Keanu's quiet grace. The world was reminded that kindness is not weakness, patience is not silence, and speaking up is not aggression, it is humanity. In the end, the story of that one dinner became a story for all, a lesson that will live longer than the meal, longer than the headlines, longer even than the memory of the place itself. It showed that even in ordinary moments, like sitting at a table waiting for food, extraordinary lessons can be taught. It showed that one man's patience and another man's courage can inspire millions. And it left the world with a powerful reminder. Always choose kindness, always choose respect, because you never know when your actions will become the story that teaches others how to be human.